mind thing is you have to win.
Ill intent, violence, physicality, pain. Enough is enough.
Well, we're going to need a new intro now. If you haven't heard yet, Antonio Pierce has been fired. We are coming to you guys live. That's Tashan Reed. That's Vic Tafur. I'm Ted Nguyen. And we said at the end of the last pod, we'll probably talk to you guys soon with an emergency pod. And here we are today. The Raiders made it official. Antonio Pierce has been fired. There seemed to be a little optimism that he might retain after the Raiders let him have his press conference. I believe it was yesterday. But yeah, news came out today, and he's officially been let go. Any other context you guys want to add to this?
General Manager Tom Telesco is safe. I guess that's the other part of it. Last time that the Raiders made a coaching change, or last couple of times, both the GM and the head coach went. But this time they held on to Tom Telesco and let go of Antonio Pierce. Even though they were hired in the same offseason, technically, Pierce was here before Telesco in his 9-game run as interim coach. And Telesco was hired after AP got hired as head coach. So they were separate. Even though they came in technically in the first offseason, it was pretty much business as usual for Pierce on Monday. He had his typical post, or next day press conference, had his meeting with his players. There was a lot of talking about 2025 and moving forward and what they need to do. And, he's speaking as a guy who, seemed like he expected to be back in place, as head coach next year, even though he hadn't had, an official confirmation in the conversation with Mark Davis. But clearly the thought process, Mark Davis thought about it overnight, Sunday, again on Monday, and came into the facility today and had a meeting with Pierce to tell him the news. And so I'm sure he reached out to his advisors and confidants to get their opinions as well. But ultimately it's his decision, and that's what he landed on.
That's ideally all that work is done before Monday. I think you look at the Patriots. They fired their guy after their win on Sunday. They clearly had a path in mind, and now I just think it's another bad look for the Raiders. I mean, not just having the guy go out there, Pierce, and talk to the media. Well, who cares to the media? But talking to the players afterwards, kind of telling him his vision for next year. He's excited. It's kind of a very positive meeting from what I was told, and players were like, "All right, this can work." Definitely, there's some things to build off this last month or so, but just again to have this drawn out for 2 days, and the guys in his office waiting to hear the bad news, and just I just think obviously Tom Brady is a big factor in this, and his talks with Mark, but just have a plan, 4 days ago. Don't wait till the last minute. Don't wait to get another. You start off behind everybody else. Everybody else has got job interview request out, and everyone else is kind of already moving. And I'm sure they have guys in mind, but those guys probably are already talking to other teams. So again, just we've talked about this. It's going to be the 6th coach, and Mark Davis is 13 years, and I just don't know. If he's learned any lessons or even knows what he's doing, but clearly he decided Pierce wasn't his guy, and I'm sure he got some help in that decision, and here we are.
Yeah, to me, looking at what happened, I think it seemed like Mark was probably undecided. Maybe he was leaning one way or the other, but for him to let, like you said, for him to let Antonio Pierce talk to the players and talk about his vision, and for him to do that press conference, it seemed like maybe his mind wasn't totally made yet until he talked to his confidants, and Adam Schefter reported that Tom Brady is going to be involved in or heavily involved in the process of hiring a new head coach. So I assume maybe Brady is part of that group that talked to him about possibly firing Antonio Pierce.
Yeah, we've written that for months that Brady's going to be involved, and clearly he will. I'm not saying that Mark knew and let him go out there and be a scam. I'm just saying that obviously he was still deciding. I think some people in the office building were shocked today when Pierce was gone. I don't think everyone saw this coming. I think people, if you asked like Tashan and I last week or so, you heard some things like, yeah, he's going to stay. A couple days later, well, it definitely was a wavering opinion. Everyone kind of waiting on Mark to kind of make his mind up. So I'm just saying, I get that, and that's fine. Be deliberate, but there's no reason to do that these last 2 days as opposed to the last 2 weeks. I just think that you have to have if you really are going to hire or fire a coach based on if he beats the Chargers in a Week 18 game, that's a flawed process.
Yeah, and Ted, I know you talked about that. You thought that was a bad process if that's the case, and it seems like that's what it was because I mean there was some legitimate deliberation from Mark Davis on what he should do, and the only reason that would be the case is if he hadn't made up his mind until that Chargers game. So as wild as it sounds, it came down to that for Antonio Pierce, and ultimately it wasn't enough for him to keep his job. But it wasn't a thing where clearly they didn't have their mind made up. Otherwise, he would have been fired on Sunday or at the worst Monday morning.
Yeah, and if we were to give the benefit of the doubt to Mark Davis, maybe he was already leaning heavy one way, but he just wasn't totally decided yet and wanted to reflect on everything and maybe not just one game. Hopefully that's the case. But yeah, I mean, ultimately he made that decision, and Antonio Pierce was fired. I mean, if you've followed us on this podcast, I thought it was the right decision. But why do you guys think that Tom Telesco kept his job? I mean, I think he had a pretty strong draft. Free agents didn't all work out, obviously, but I mean, yeah, he didn't choose Antonio Pierce like you mentioned. He was hired after Antonio Pierce was hired. Like, what do you guys think about Tom Telesco?
I think it was a draft class. I think especially this team organization has not drafted well in a long time. So I think if you're Mark Davis, I'm sure you're like, oh yeah, hey, we got some guys this year. We got some guys definitely are foundation pieces. So that's a big part of it. I think he said, I think he told Deshaun this back in Atlanta, that he's going to evaluate these guys separately. So I think if you are putting this year on someone, and obviously he's not happy with the way it turned out, he puts it on Pierce. I think Telesco was hired afterwards, after Antonio was, and he definitely was in charge, and he made some moves. Got Christian Wilkins, and we mentioned the draft class. But I think if you are going to question the direction and some of the things that happened this year, I can see where he would put that on Antonio and Tom, and also to be a smartass. Now at least he has a guy who can be a scapegoat for next year. Telesco can be a scapegoat for next year when things don't work out. So I mean, it's just a weird way of doing things. But yeah, I think Tom did a good job this year. So I think uh, I'm curious about how that's going to work with him and Tom Brady, but that's another story for another day.
Yeah, I mean, like really the only thing that you can knock Telesco too seriously for this year would be, how he handled the quarterback situation. Obviously, that's the most important position in football, and so that's a big thing. But he whiffed pretty badly on that Gardner Minshew signing, giving him 2 years, $25 million. I'm not saying that they shouldn't have signed a veteran stopgap type of quarterback, but we've seen others that were way cheaper than him perform way better than him this season. I mean, Justin Fields was better than him, Russell Wilson, Sam Darnold. The list goes on. And so if even if you weren't going to draft a rookie, they signed the wrong veteran stopgap. That was pretty clear because Minshew was terrible this year. And that's not an insignificant amount of money, $25 million. And so, I don't really knock them too much for not getting a quarterback in the first round. I mean, those top three teams were never going to trade down, really. You could critique them for not trading up for one of the other three quarterbacks, J.J. McCarthy, Michael Penix, and Bo Nix. I mean, Nix has been an offensive rookie of the year candidate, and he was right there one spot ahead of them, so they could have maybe traded up and tried to get him. Or, we didn't really get to see McCarthy or Penix play all that much this year, so they're less of a full evaluation on them. But Nix looks like at least a solid starting quarterback moving forward. And, the player they ended up getting, Brock Bowers, with all that being said, is probably going to be an all-pro as a rookie, so I can't really knock a guy for drafting an all-pro with his first-round pick. But the Raiders still stunk this year, partly because they didn't have a quarterback. And I'm not saying that Sam Darnold would have had the same year he's having with the Vikings with the Raiders, or even Russell Wilson would be having the same year that he's had with the Steelers. But the fact remains that they made the wrong move at quarterback this offseason, and that's something that's not on Pierce because Telesco has personnel power, and that was ultimately his decision. And so that's really the only thing you can knock Telesco for this year, I would say. But I think the draft class and some of the other moves that he made, outweigh that. Signing Christian Wilkins. I know he only played 5 games, but it was, fluke injuries happen. And then also, trading Devontae Adams and getting the 3rd round pick for him. That's something that they can use this year to help improve the team.
Yeah, I mean, I think whoever made the decision to start Gardner Minshew over Aiden O'Connell that was a bad decision. I mean, they would have won a couple more games probably with Aiden over Gardner. I don't care what you guys
I
say.
mean, okay, you're a 6-win team instead of a 4-win team. It doesn't fucking
I know,
matter.
but
You still
it
suck.
still makes a difference at the end of the
like
day.
it did. Like they still
But-
suck either way. Like Aiden O'Connell's not this
Yeah, but I mean,
great quarterback.
at the end of the day, whoever made that decision should not be making those decisions. Anyways, Antonio Pierce didn't have a great.
I was going to ask him. It is all hindsight. And I think yesterday Antonio mentioned he would have gone with Gardner. I mean, gone with Aiden in retrospect. But
Not
again,
hindsight because I pushed it. No, just kidding.
I'm just saying. I mean, no one had any idea that you're going to get this version of Gardner Minshew. I mean, he was terrible, and he hasn't been terrible his NFL career. This is by far the worst version of him. So, and he still beat out. I mean, I don't know if he beat out, but you can say Aiden didn't beat him out in training camp, which would have been easier for everyone if he had. So, I agree with Tashan. Like, best case scenario, they win 1 or 2 more games. I mean, I'll tell you what. I mean, another thing is people are forgetting is like that first part of the schedule was all those teams with great pass rushes. I mean, Aiden O'Connell probably gets killed in those games, and probably he's out week 3 anyway. So I think that was a big part of the decision factor. Like, this guy can move, this guy can't. I mean, so I just think again, hindsight's 2020. Uh, Either way, there was not neither guy's an answer for this team. So I think like
Yeah.
one of his last words Antonio said was, "You know what's a glaring need," and it is. I mean, for sure.
Yeah, and this roster, I mean, it's not a deep roster. We knew that. And anytime you have 5 starters go out on defense, Max Crosby, Christian Wilkins, Malcolm Kuntz, Marcus Epps, Jacorian Bennett, like this was not going to be a successful year for the Raiders. Like it just wasn't going. I mean, obviously, you can't predict injuries. You didn't know that the defense was going to be decimated in that way. But between that, the running back room not being any good, the offensive line having so many issues, Devontae Adams asking out for a trade, like, you know, maybe they're a 6-win team instead of a 4-win team, but you know, I don't think it makes that much of a difference altogether. But all that to say, just in terms of Telesco, I just think there was enough there for him to make it to year 2. But like Vic said, you know, if they can't figure out this quarterback plan moving forward, like we're going to be talking about Tom Telesco next offseason because that's how this league goes.
Yeah, I mean, but the thing is, any decision that costs you 2 games is not a good decision. But regardless, I think
Ted, we'd be with you if it was 8 wins versus 10 wins, but it's 4 versus 6.
Oh,
like
God, I feel like you guys
it's
are
a lost season.
I feel like you guys are just excusing every bad decision because it's a bad season.
No, we're not
and like
excusing it.
it doesn't matter. But,
no, we're just saying that Aiden O'Connell's not that good. He's a below average, like low level
yeah, but he's
starter
still-
or like a
I think-
level backup.
I think he's way
like
better than
Tom
Gardner
Brady
Minshew.
or something.
and regardless, the fact that the offensive line was bad was more reason to start Aiden O'Connell because he got rid of the ball faster. Gardner Minshew held on to the ball, and he was a good athlete, so he didn't get
Also,
get away.
Did you watch Aiden O'Connell play? Like, like, did we not see the same guy the last few weeks? That
okay, let's move on. I don't want to get into a whole Aiden O'Connell debate. We could do that on another podcast.
Yeah, fans are tired of our act. Let's move on.
But you know, just to put a nail in the coffin or whatever, Antonio Pierce, CEO, head coach. Two things you got to do as a CEO, head coach. You have to be an ace game management guy. He was awful, possibly the worst game management coach in the league if it wasn't for Matt Eberflus. And you know, just to recap some decisions, punting when they were down against the Chargers in Week 1, that was seen as one of the worst decisions, one of the worst coaching decisions in a long time analytically. And then at the end of the Chiefs game, they had a chance to win that game. Just weird timeout management. The whole fumble snap thing could have been avoided if they just let the clock run instead of trying that weird throwaway play. But game management was terrible. And you just can't have that. And maybe you could have that excuse that he was a rookie coach and he was getting better if it wasn't god awful and it didn't stay the same the whole time, and it stayed the same the whole time. So that couldn't happen. And as a CEO, head coach, you have to be able to hire. And he completely blew the Luke Getsy hire off. You know, I know he wanted Cliff Kingsbury, and I have my opinions about Cliff Kingsbury as well. But he ended up hiring Luke Getsy, and facts are facts. That's who he ended up with. Ended up being a terrible hire, got fired. And if Patrick Graham left, you know, we don't know how the defense is going to be. Who is he going to hire as defensive coordinator? He has no experience in NFL as a defensive coordinator. So it was just really hard to see where the value of Antonio Pierce is as a CEO, head coach, motivator. but there's just no tangent value he brings as a head coach to me.
I mean, I think he deserves. I mean, deserves the wrong word, but I think you could argue that giving another year to grow into the role. I mean, this team is not going to contend this year. It was never going to be in the playoff race, so it could be a learning. And plus, the injuries you mentioned, I just think that the things you talked about, the game management and the CEO stuff and the coaching staff. I mean, obviously those are issues, but those are things you can learn from and grow from. And other guys in the league have chances to do that, and other guys get more than 1 year. So I think it's a little bit of a quick hook, I think, based when you look at all the different things that happened. I mean, the Devontae Adams thing we haven't talked about yet, that was a huge deal this year, and that kind of cut his offense at the knees, especially talking about Luke Gessie and Antonio Pierce. That was a big deal. I mean, they lost their best player in offense, I mean, mentally probably week 1 or 2, and physically week 4. So I just think that's a big factor, which people are kind of glossing over. So I get the issues with Antonio. I just think that for a team that's had so many different changes, so many different coaches, so many different, plans and regimes. And I mean, a year ago, fans were chanting his name. The owner was saying this guy's the best guy ever. I don't know why that has to, like, all of a sudden after 1 year you pull the plug and don't give it a chance to see where it goes.
Yeah, I think with the game management stuff, like it didn't improve this season, but I mean, like you kind of knew that he was going to have some growing pains as an inexperienced coach, like just a coach period, let alone a head coach. Like he's only been coaching for 10 years, 4 at the high school level, 4 in college, and then 2 in the NFL. And you got to figure out how to do that shit by experience. And, we didn't see growth this season, but, who's to say that he couldn't have had growth moving forward? But I do think, that coaching staff element was one of the biggest factors because, we know that Antonio Pierce is on a short-term deal. And if you are an up-and-coming offensive coordinator candidate, why would you come here after he fired his previous offensive coordinator after 9 games? And when you don't, and he's, kind of on thin ice as a head coach. Like, what if you come here and you got to suck again and get fired and now your career's off the rails? And same thing for a defensive coordinator. And so I think that probably put Pierce in a tough situation when you're meeting with Mark Davis and he asks, what's your plan going forward at coordinator? I mean, you could throw some names out there, but like how realistic is it that those guys would actually want to come here given the situation? And so, it wasn't completely Pierce's fault. I think the quarterback situation, as we mentioned, that's mostly on Telesco. I think the defensive injuries, like it's not really in his control. The Kingsbury thing, you can kind of put blame on both sides, but NFL isn't always fair, and Mark Davis couldn't evaluate this based off of what was fair to Pierce. He had to evaluate what's best for the Raiders moving forward. And, however you got here, if you got to the point where Pierce wasn't going to be able to put together a coherent staff for next year and your quarterback situation's iffy, and you think that a new head coach could potentially change at least one of those factors, then you have to go ahead and do it. And also, given Pierce was on that short-term deal, it wasn't like, it's not like John Gruden's situation where Mark Davis would have had to eat 9 years of a $100 million contract or something like that to do it. We don't know the exact details, but it wasn't much money in the grand scheme of things that, Mark Davis had to eat in order to move on from Pierce. And so all that factor in, I understand how he moved on, but I also could have understood it if he kept him. I think it could have went both ways, but this is the movie made and we'll see how it goes from here.
Actually, I think there's 2 parts to this. I think obviously, part of it is you're letting Pierce go, but now what do they do? Who are they bringing in next? Did Brady promise some big names? Might be interested. Like, so to me, I can't really analyze this move in totality until I know who's coming in to talk, who they're going to hire. So if I say they went away from Pierce because they got this guy, okay, that makes sense. So it's hard. I mean, right now we're in the middle of it, so we can't really like stand back and look at the big picture. But let's see who they bring in to talk to, who the candidates are, who Brady has some pull with, what's next, what's the vision. Let me see the vision now because it's different. I mean, in the past, I would rip Mark Davis and stuff because he was the guy. But now he said, hey, I'm going to lean on Tom Brady. Tom Brady's going to come in here at some point. He'll be in charge. You start to see some of that pull right now. So I'll wait and see who they bring in, who they hire. Then we can really analyze if it was the right move to go on from Pierce and bring the new guy in.
Yeah, that's a great point, too, that I was going to bring up. A lot of the times when you see a franchise just go through the revolving door of leadership, the one constant that remains is the owner. If you have a bad owner, you have bad ownership, your team's going to be bad. It's just hard to be good when you have a bad owner. And Mark Davis just has not had a good track record since he's taken over. I mean, he's made money. He's gone to Vegas. The team has gone up in value. He put some money in his pocket. But I do give him credit, though, because I think he saw that he is a little bit over his head. And he gave he wanted to bring Brady in. He sold part of the Raiders to Brady at a discount price, I think, because he wants to have somebody actually that knows football help him on these things. And I think Brady, is going to be a big part of hiring this new coach. So I don't know if it's going to work out. And I talk about process a lot, and I think this is part of a good process. We'll see how it works, though.
Yeah, and I mean, even before AP got hired, we talked to Mark Davis back then, and he, expressed essentially wanting to hire sort of a president of football operations to oversee things and fill in that sort of next level of football knowledge that he knew that he didn't have. And the vision always seemed to be for Tom Brady to basically be that figure. And I know he can't formally have that role due to NFL rules, but that's sort of how we've been describing his role. The expectation is for him to basically be a high-level advisor. But it won't just be him. We also know that Richard Seymour, who's a minority owner now, was involved in the hiring process last year. And the panel is, we don't know what the hiring panel is going to be yet, but it's most likely going to consist of, Mark Davis, Tom Brady, Richard Seymour, Sandra Douglas Morgan, team president, and then Larry Delson, one of the board members, is usually involved in it as well. We'll see if anybody else is involved in the hiring panel, but that's probably going to be the core group moving forward. And it seems like, Davis is still going to be his final decision. Like, he's a controlling owner, but it seems like he's going to be leaning a little bit harder on, his advisors than maybe he's done in the past. But that doesn't always pan out. I mean, a couple of searches ago, Ken Herrock pretty much led up that search that led them to Josh McDaniels and Dave Ziegler. And we saw how that went. So different doesn't always mean better. I know that Tom Brady was a great player and Richard Seymour was as well, but we'll see if they're any better at picking head coaches than Mark Davis is. So,
I mean, the bar is low. I mean, the process has to get better than it was. I mean, they went from not even asking Josh McDaniels about his Denver time, like that's not, who cares for the Broncos? So we're focused on, So clearly the process can't get worse than it has been. So you hope that Tom can add to that. And so, I mean, last year Antonio Pierce sat in on Telesco's interview. So just it's been a weird deal, and hopefully they get some positive direction in that manner.
Yeah. I mean, the one thing is Brady. He knows ball, so he's going to be able to pick the whoever the coaching candidate's brain about that, and like what's Mark Davis going to do in a coaching interview if he's trying to see if a coach knows ball? Like Brady's going to at least add that, and Seymour is going to probably add that. So I mean, how do you guys envision this going? Like, do you think it's going to be Mark maybe finding a few guys or finding some candidates and then just wheeling Brady and Seymour into the interviews? Like, how do you think this process is going to go?
Like I mentioned, I hope, I'm guessing, and I think that's what I've heard, that Brady has some guys in mind. And I mean, I think everyone talks about Mike Vrabel, but I think he's already gone. I think he's going to be the Patriots' new coach. I think that's a done deal. So you look at guys like who has ties with maybe Brian Flores. I mean, we had a story today that around we had 10 guys, Tashan and so there's a lot of guys, and I think they'll bring a bunch of them in. And I think talking to as many guys as you can doesn't hurt. So I think, but I'd hope Brady has a short list in mind, and you go from there. And I wouldn't say it's a great inspiring list of guys this year, but they're guys. So I think it depends which way you want to go with this. You want to go with an offensive guy, young guy, like this was a trend for a while. Or you want to go with someone with some experience. I mean, I haven't heard Pete Carroll's name today, which I think is kind of ridiculous. But I mean, again, there's different ways you can go, and I think we'll see the plan shortly.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the exact process of who's identifying the candidates and all that, we don't quite have all those details yet. But among the candidates out there, I mean, like Vic said, we had a story of 10 guys. It's not saying these are only guys, but the 10 guys we went with were Ben Johnson, Mike Vrabel, John Gruden, Liam Cohen, Jesse Minter, Aaron Glenn, Steve Spagnuolo, Brian Flores, Todd Monken, and Joe Brady. Like you mentioned, there's other guys. There's Pete Carroll. There's Anthony Weaver, the Dolphins defensive coordinator. There's a number of other guys out there, but can't list every single head coaching candidate in the world. Otherwise, it'd be a 4,000 word story. But it'd be interesting to see. Like, since they are a team in need of a quarterback, I think a lot of people automatically think they should hire whoever the hot offensive coordinator is. But again, like, if you are one of those offensive coordinators, like, why would you want to come to a place where there's not a clear path to a quarterback? If you're a Ben Johnson, for example, like, I have to imagine he has better options than that. And there's nothing wrong with hiring a defensive-minded head coach or a CEO-style head coach. They can still hire like a good offensive coordinator. Like that's literally what Dan Campbell did with the Lions. I don't think everybody knows who Ben Johnson is now, but I don't think really that many people knew who he was before he got that job. And he's been there for a few years, and the Lions have had a ton of success. And so you don't necessarily have to hire an offensive play caller just to make a good head coaching hire. But there's plenty of other good head coaches in the league, and so we'll see how this all pans out. But there's some good candidates out there for sure.
Yeah, I think at first I thought Vrabel would be pretty much gone to the Patriots, but Ben Johnson did express some interest in the Patriots job because it's a pretty hot job. I mean, to get the chance to coach Drake May, who I thought was, if it wasn't for Jaden Daniels, I thought he was better than Bo Nix if you watch some of his film. Yeah, I don't think the Raiders will have a chance at Ben Johnson. He's going to be the hottest coaching candidate. He's calling the shots basically in these interviews. I just have a hard time seeing Ben Johnson have any interest in this job. But if he does end up getting a Patriots job, that does open up Vrabel.
Yeah, the Patriots. I mean, they interviewed both of the. I know we're not supposed to say this, but like they interviewed the 2 black head coaching candidates today, and Vrabel's coming in on Thursday. Like we can kind of see where the Patriots thing is going. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I think Vrabel's pretty much off the board.
He's got the history there. They got a lot of salary cap space. They got the young quarterback ready in place, and I just think that's for him. It's a perfect job for him. I can't imagine why he wouldn't want that job.
Shit, they brought him in halfway through last season, winding down them right when the coach is there, man. So.
Yeah, I mean, I like Vrabel, but he has a great agent. So because like somehow he became a fired head coach that couldn't get a job last year, and now he's the hottest coaching candidate on the beat besides Ben Johnson right now. So
part of that is when the NFL, when you fire 7 coaches a year for 25 years, the list of guys that's available is not a great list. I mean, you run through it so many times, you always have no patience, and they have so much money. All of a sudden, it's all a bunch of retreads and the guys who don't know. So I think that's why this list this year is like, Vrabel and Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn, and I mean, all of a sudden, Pete Carroll and John Gruden. So I just like you see where there's not like a great list of candidates. I don't think. I mean, and obviously you can find the right guy, and interviews go certain ways, and you can find magic. But I mean, I would say the reason Vrabel's a star of the show is because the rest of the show is not great.
Yeah, I mean, I think Vrabel would make a good head coach for sure, and he should definitely be one of the top candidates. But like the way people are talking about him, it's just a little surprising to me. But yeah, other candidates like you guys mentioned, Pete Carroll. That's a very surprising name too to me. He just kind of flamed out in Seattle. Seattle gave him so many years to get the thing back on track, and he was never able to get Seattle back on track. The defense fell off, worse in the league for I think worst run defense in the league for 3 years, and not even just worse. Like they were just getting gashed. I mean, I think Josh Jacobs ran for like 200 on them 1 year. So it just seemed like he kind of didn't modernize himself to the game, and just made the wrong hires, including Shane Waldron, who got fired by the Bears too. But great culture guy, very old. So I don't know if that's the best choice.
But he's in great shape, man. Kick your ass. So.
It's true. But when's the cliff coming?
He'll kick my ass too. How about that? There you go. I'm not picking on Ted. People say, "Oh, you're picking on Ted." No, I'm not picking on Ted. It's all love.
Yeah, no, I don't feel that way. I just feel oppressed by you two. No, I'm just kidding. I mean, I like Liam Cohen a lot. And Brady just got a firsthand look at Liam Cohen. He was calling the Buccaneers game. I'm just really impressed by what he did with the Buccaneers, especially with the injuries they dealt with, getting that run game fixed, and getting Baker Mayfield to look like a borderline top 10 quarterback. And Dave Canales kind of started that last year.
Yeah. I think like that kind of ship was already rolling a little bit with Canales kind of getting that going last year. But as long as if you're not going to be in the Ben Johnson bucket, I would assume that Liam Cohen's probably the next hottest offense coordinator name out there. So it makes sense to at least bring him in for an interview. Obviously, there's more components to being a good head coach. Like maybe he's terrible with managing people and has no idea who he would hire on the staff and all that. Like I don't know. I don't know the guy well enough to speak to that, but he's definitely should be on the list of guys that you would at least bring in for an interview. Or since they're in the playoffs, I guess it would have to be virtual because of the new rules. So.
And you could say you're so far behind the other three teams in your division now. I mean, it's a huge gap now between the other three teams in terms of the coaching and the quarterbacks. You're so far behind. You definitely could say, might as well just get a young coach, get a young quarterback, pair them together, and just look down the road quite a ways and say, we'll get there in 2 or 3 years. I think that might be the way to go because I think, like I said, it's not. To think they can turn this around quickly seems to be not realistic.
Yeah, I mean, they've been trying this kind of weird, like between a rebuild and between an all-in type of thing for a few years now, and it's just been disastrous. So they got to just stick with the rebuild and find players that are going to be on this team long term and not flashy players, build through the trenches. Yeah, and another candidate to consider, Brian Flores, is going to be a hot name too. Brian Flores obviously has really transformed that Vikings defense. It's not working with a ton of blue chip talent, but that defense consistently is one of the best week in and week out. But does the Brian Flores experience with Tua kind of scare you guys, especially if the Raiders do decide they want to get a young quarterback?
I mean, I think it, could give them some cause for pause just because of kind of, just Brian Flores having some of those interpersonal issues that he had with players. And it also sounded like the front office in Miami, like sounds kind of Josh McDaniels-y, a little bit. So I think there would be some questions about making sure that he's learned from that experience and has grown, which is fair to ask, I would say. And then also when it comes to, we were talking about this with Pierce, but his ability to put together the coaching staff. I can't remember what year it was, but I remember one year the Dolphins had that weird like co-offensive coordinator shit that they had going on down there. So like making sure that he's not going to do something like that again. I think that would be
they also
pretty.
Had Ryan Fitzpatrick like play closer.
Yeah.
Which
he was really good against the Raiders.
Before, but
they figured it out when they played the Raiders. That's for sure. But but I think those are two valid points that would come up. Is how has he improved with the interpersonal skills and then also his ability to hire a coaching staff. But if he has grown in those areas, which is possible, like people can grow and change, I think he'd be a pretty strong candidate. And obviously he also knows Tom Brady pretty well.
Yeah, I think if Tom vouches for him, I think Marcus be okay. He's cool. He's I mean, so I think it all depends on Brady.
Yeah. Hey, you hired Patrick Graham, so that's a good hire.
Yeah.
Hey, and maybe he keeps Patrick Graham if he does come in.
Yeah, see, to me it makes no sense because you're Patrick Graham. He's interviewing for jobs right now. I think a head coaching job in Jacksonville, I think, and DC and the Bengals, if I'm not mistaken. But you're Patrick Graham. He wants to be a head coach. So being a D coordinator under Brian Flores, you would get no shine. All the credit would go to Brian. I think you would lose any kind. I mean, I don't know how you would. I think that's a bad move for Patrick.
Yeah, I would agree.
Okay. All right. Let's get into some questions. People are burning questions. We got a ton of donations coming in. All right. Mutation X2. How do you feel about Pete Carroll? I think he's the best candidate based on his track record in comparison to the other coaches in the division. Bonus to see the Carroll-Harbaugh rivalry reignited. I do agree that the Harbaugh-Carroll rivalry would be funny and fun to watch, but I just don't know. He's so. I mean, I'm not an ageist, but he's an older coach that just hasn't shown the ability to adapt to the modern game. I think it's a safe hire. He'll probably get you a bunch of 500 seasons, but I just don't know where the ceiling is with Pete Carroll. Maybe he's a bridge to another coach, but I don't know if you want that.
I disagree with you. Actually, I'm a big Pete Carroll guy, and I think they actually were turning around last year. I think that's why I was a little surprised he got let go. I think you saw them kind of finally getting this thing turning the corner last year. So I think in that regard, I think Pete still knows what he's doing, and he's obviously a big, culture guy. And I think he has a lot of success. But to me, it's the age. I just looked it up. He's 73. And again, if you're that far behind the three teams in the division, I mean, 73. I mean, it is ageism. I apologize, but to me, I just can't see that being a good fit.
Yeah, I think part of it is He is, yeah, he's pretty old, but also like, how close does he think the Raiders are to contending? Because I would have to think that if he comes out of, comes back into coaching, like he's probably not trying to do a long-term rebuild because of his age. I mean, like,
Good point.
again, I don't want to get morbid or anything, but like, like I don't know if
Oh my
he's trying to
God.
wait around 3 or 4 years for like a team to get competitive. Like I think he probably would want to come back for a team that he thinks can get competitive in short order. And I'm not quite sure the Raiders are that team. So I would be interested to see if he's interested in the Raiders job, even if they were interested in him. But I think, obviously, I mean, Carroll, he's probably a Hall of Famer or at least borderline Hall of Fame coach moving forward. So I have no questions about his credentials, and I don't really overreact too much to the end of his Seahawks tenure. I think it's just one of those situations where he was there forever, but they weren't going to be a Super Bowl team anymore and they needed a split. But I think that the timing of it would be a little weird, just given, he is pretty old. Same reason why, like, I think some people were talking about that with Bill Belichick. Like, would he really, I think they're about the same age. Like, would he want to take over a rebuilding team? And so, yeah, I think he's a good coach, but I don't know if it's a fit.
I'm sure
Yeah.
Pete's confident enough. He'll be like, "Yeah, I could do it in 2 years." I'm sure that's the way he is. But I'm sure Mark will love to hear that. But I just don't know. We're talking about the quarterback situation and the roster and the holes on it. I don't know if that's realistic. And I don't know what other teams are going to be in for him, but the word is he wants back in. So that's definitely something you hear a lot. So we'll see.
Yeah, he might be 76 by the time the Raiders are ready to compete. So
Okay, he's in great shape, man. So maybe he's 66 and
hey,
body.
I wish I would be as energetic as Pete Carroll is at 73.
Yeah. And thanks everybody for the donations, by the way. Appreciate all these.
Yeah, I appreciate it, man.
Coming in.
Yeah, I can feed my family now. Jorge Mesa asked,
Your
this
family.
may
You got a
be a
dog? Oh, you
reaction.
got a dog. That's it. Go ahead. Sorry.
Hey, my dog eats expensive, man. I spend more money on his food than mine. This may be a reaction comment, but firing Pierce feels like a sign Mark Davis is more focused on appeasing Tom Brady than fixing the years of dysfunction.
I feel like it's the same thing. I mean, like if if Brady, if he cares about the Raiders being good, which I assume he would, buying into the franchise, like you have to fix the years of dysfunction. So I don't really view those as two separate things. Like I just think ultimately it comes down to, Mark Davis just wasn't confident that Pierce was the guy moving forward, given that the situation that they found themselves in. Like, I'm not saying that Mark Davis didn't think it was possible that Pierce could potentially get better as a head coach, but given all the factors we talked about, them having to rebuild the coaching staff this offseason, find a new quarterback, et cetera, I can see him coming around to believing that there's just better head coaches out there that he could go get and accelerate this thing quicker than AP could. And so I think that's what it came down to more so than, like, again, people, like, I get it. Like, he's going to lean on Brady as an advisor, but like Mark Davis is still the controlling owner of the Raiders, guys. Like, Tom Brady is not the owner now. I know he bought into the team at 5%. Like, it's not it's not that yet. It's, maybe one day, but as of now, Mark Davis is still the Raiders owner.
Yeah. And like we mentioned, I think a change of process is a good thing. All right. Verbal jiu-jitsu. Sorry, that's I don't know why I messed that up so bad. Asks, there isn't bad players. There are bad situations. Darnold and Baker were bad, and then great play callers and revive their career. Why can't AOC?
Well, I will correct you, sir. There are bad players. Like, again, compared to the average
AOC,
the average person walking around, like, yeah, they're not bad players, but compared to the NFL players, there are bad players. And I don't think AOC is a bad player. I think he's a useful player. I mean, every team needs that type of guy, a high-end backup, low-end starter, just in case something does happen to your starter. But if you're rolling in a week one with AOC as your starter, chances are, like, you got some fucked up shit going on in your quarterback room just because he's not that good. And also, he's old. Like, not old, like actually old, but like for a third-year player to already be 27, 28 years old, like, I don't know how much better guys really. I think he's like the damn near the same age as Sam Darnold is, So, and Sam Darnold's played like 6 seasons. So it's just a way different situation. And also, both of those guys, Darnold and Baker, I mean, those are top 3, top 5 picks. They're just incredibly way more physically talented than AOC ever will be or ever was. And so it's just not a good comparison. And I think he's a fine guy to have in your quarterback room, but the Raiders absolutely need to do everything they can to add to that quarterback room this offseason, whether it's a veteran, a rookie, something, but they can't just run it back with what they have. I guess they could, but it's going to be a similar season to the one that you guys just saw this year in all likelihood.
Yeah, that comparison is just different. It's different skill sets, man. I think both those guys, like they actually were the number 1 overall picks. Both of them, I think they were. So
No, I don't think Darnold was.
Darnold
wasn't.
No, Mayfield was picked number 1 that same year. Darnold was picked 3
Okay.
or 4 or something like
3 or
that.
4. All right, my bad. So yeah, they both have different skill sets than Aiden does. I hate to keep shitting on Aiden because he's a great kid and he works hard and he's gotten better. I mean, there's no question he's better now than he was last year, and that trend can keep growing up, but. He's limited, I think, and I think anyone who's watched this team, I think Pierce would tell you the same thing. I mean, you root for him. He's just a tough kid, and he's done well when he's been called upon at times. But he also makes mistakes. He also struggles. There's things he can't do. So I just think that that comparison is not really good. I think the other guys who are out there who are probably, I want to say what's the guy's name? Zach Wilson's a guy who was an elite a skilled guy who's kind of flamed out, and that's a guy who could maybe wind up somewhere with second chance in new OC, and because he has a skill set, he has what you're looking for in elite quarterbacks.
Man, they were calling him Aiden Vick. You guys are talking about his mobility. No, I'm just kidding. It's true. Those guys, Baker and Darnold, they were first-round picks. A lot of physical ability, just not in the right situation. They got plugged in the right situation, and now you're seeing some of that physical ability shine. The ceiling is just not very high for Aiden O'Connell. I still think he could be, pretty decent, but it's just not a very high ceiling. I think maybe you hope that he could be like a Kirk Cousins type of quarterback. I mean, physically they're pretty similar, but the hope is that
that's a high ceiling. I mean, Kirk was pretty good for a while. That's a pretty high ceiling.
Yeah, I mean, but it's hard to get there in this day and age for a quarterback to get to that level with that physical skill set. It's just hard to do because you need so much mental development, and you have to be special in that part of the game to be able to make up for what you lack physically. And we saw maybe some more of those quarterbacks in the 90s and that sort of deal, but it's just a different game now, and it's just hard to win and get to that level. So I think the hope is that maybe he get to a mental level that Kirk Cousins did, if you do believe in Aiden O'Connell. But it's just very hard to do it in this day and age, which is why physical traits are such in demand at the quarterback position. All right, Jorge Meza asks, why should fans trust Mark Davis to rebuild when every coaching hire under his ownership has ended in failure and chaos?
They should not. All right, next question.
Yeah. Man, I think that's the short answer. I mean, like, there's really no reason to have much faith in his ability to find a quality head coach. I guess people could say John Gruden was going to be. He just didn't have to have all those racist emails and stuff. But I think that kind of factors into it as well. And also, he was a terrible GM. That's part of the reason why the Raiders roster was what it was. But I think Mark Davis is aware of his failings in that area, and that's why we're seeing some changes in the ownership group. And long term, we'll see what happens with ownership of the franchise. We've talked about it. Mark Davis doesn't have a spouse as it stands or any kids. And so at some point, if that remains the case, there's going to be a more permanent and concrete ownership change. But, Mark Davis ain't that old yet. We don't got to start talking about that kind of stuff. But, he is trying to change things and factoring in different people's opinions. So we'll see if that changes the results this time around.
And I will say another reason for optimism, I guess, if we're looking for one, is now, thanks to the Vegas move and the TV deals, he has so much money that now you can just throw money at the problems. So you threw money at Tom Brady, you brought him in, you can fire coaches after a year because who cares, there's money again. So at least now his impatience can be matched by the money to pull it off and get better options and not care about the price. So maybe that's a positive.
Captain Sunshine. I like that. But I do agree. He has to prove that he could do it. He just hasn't yet. So he'll have a little bit more help this time. All right, Trip asks, can you explain issues with AP's practices? I remember story this year about players having concern within something. Also, who's most likely to be the next coach?
You want to, Vic? I know you said something
My
about
bad.
the
I'm
practice
answering
this
a
month.
text, so I'll jump back in a second. Sorry.
Got you. Yeah, so I know that something that AP talked about in his press conference Monday was with training camp in Costa Mesa. They kind of went away to lean into the whole team bonding thing and whatnot, and get away from their families and all that. But he does think that maybe them going as hard as they did and kind of jumping back into things pretty quickly once they got back to Vegas might have contributed to all the injuries that they had this year. So that was something they was talking about changing next year with training camp. But Vic, I think you might have had something else related to practices that we included today.
Oh yeah, so some players mentioned maybe there's a little bit. Sometimes there was a lack of detail and execution in practices. Maybe there wasn't, for all the bravado and tough talk. Maybe there should be some more, focus on exact things. And maybe that was one small point. But again, at this point, people are looking for stuff. But I think clearly his lack of experience. Things you can learn from. He mentioned that he had to learn some things this year, and he did. And unfortunately, he won't be able to carry those out. But I think a first-year coach, there were some hiccups, and especially when you change coordinators and stuff. I think that's also part of it. So there was a lack of focus at times.
Yeah, I mean, I think practice planning is something that people don't think about, but practice planning is a big thing. Like how you spend your time in the off season. You have you have such limited practice time, especially with the new CBA agreement, that you have to spend every minute or have to be efficient with your time every minute. You have to devote practice into the right things, and that's something that an experienced coach knows how to do. Obviously, Antonio Pierce first year, and he hired a bunch of guys to help him with those aspects. But maybe the development curve was just a little too big for him in that aspect. And that's something that a veteran coach like Mike Vrabel or Pete Carroll, they're probably really good at those things. But to me, that is a legitimate issue. I don't know if that's something you fire somebody over, but it could just be one of the reasons why he's not a head coach.
Yeah, and I guess most likely next, or whoever's most likely to be the next head coach. I don't know. I haven't thought too much about this, but I'll roll with Brian Flores. I like that one. I think connection, Tom Brady, and checks that box. I think he's been a head coach before, so he has experience. Checks that box. He's not an offensive play caller, but he is a defensive play caller, so he can help fill in for Patrick Graham. We know that this roster needs some work, but he showed with the Vikings that even if he doesn't have the best roster and talent, he's able to put together a pretty good defense, I would say. The Vikings are one of the better defenses in the league this season. And he'll steal Josh McCown and bring him over to be the offense coordinator, and he'll be ready to roll.
I mean, when coaches do get hired, they do typically bring guys from the staff that they were on. So that's a good possibility. I was going to say maybe Brian Flores, but he gets a offensive coordinator and he stays totally out of the picture on offense. I could buy that, and he doesn't talk to the quarterback, whoever the quarterback.
It's just don't speak. Don't even say hello to him.
Or only positive things. He only can say positive things to his quarterback. All right,
you got, Vic?
I like Flores. That's a good name. I think I was going to throw out the if you're really going for the whole why not kind of crazy leap thing, go with the Deion Sanders pairing. Deion and Brady are tight. Who knows? I mean, this place is nuts, so that wouldn't. Nothing shocks me. But
you just love the drama, huh?
Nah,
you said most likely.
I could say John Gruden. I mean, if I like drama, John Gruden, I'm sure he and Mark have talked about that possibility. I think John wants to get back into coaching. I think he's pretty happy with the Barstool thing right now, but said maybe wants to wait for another job next year. But I guarantee you, if they have a list on the whiteboard somewhere, John Gruden's name is on it.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me. We know Mark Davis loves him some John Gruden. I like Liam Cohen. I mean, I think Tashan kind of sold me on the Brian Flores dream a little bit, but Liam Cohen's is a good name. I like what he does offensively. You get a young quarterback. It's always good to pair him with a offensive-minded head coach, but obviously you don't want that to be your top criteria. There's a lot of other things that go into being a head coach. All right, let's get into our next question. Verbal Jiu-Jitsu asks, how do we know Brady doesn't see AOC as a starter? How do we know Brady would even excel at his job? We keep assuming Brady will make great decisions. I don't assume Brady's going to be good at this job. I just think that he knows football better than Mark Davis, and he will provide a different perspective. And I think that is a good idea to add his perspective to things. And we'll see how things work out. I mean, you can only look at the process and decide whether the process is good, and then look at the results, and then change your mind or change whatever your hypothesis is afterwards.
Yeah, I mean,
good.
I'll say we already kind of hit on the AOC part of it. Like I wouldn't assume that, but also like Tom Brady has eyes and he's played quarterback, like he knows what a high end quarterback looks like. So I would assume that's why. But when it comes to him excelling at his job, we don't know. Like we've seen this go multiple ways with great former players stepping into executive roles. Like you could be Michael Jordan and be terrible at it. You could be Jerry West and be great at it. Like so it's not necessarily a guarantee that he's going to be good at this thing, but I don't know. Like, there's no guarantee that anybody's going to be good at this thing. Whether it's one of these first-time head coaches or first-time GMs or whatever you do. And so, I don't think leaning on Tom Brady and him knowing as much football as he does is the worst thing to try. You can try it out, and if he's awful, then you can go to somebody else. But I think it's fine.
Yeah, we have no idea what he thinks about O'Connell, and I don't think he sold anybody. Maybe he sold Mark Davis, but I'm sure most of his thoughts have been private, and we'll find out, I think, shortly enough. But we do know that he's worked with Shadur Sanders, and he likes him a lot. And he's been very complimentary of his skill set, so I think that's something to look out for. But yeah, there's no guarantee he knows what he's doing, just because he was a great player. I mean, we talked about Michael Jordan and how bad he was with the Hornets. So I just think you hope. Fans can. I mean, Raider fans, yeah, I feel bad, but it's all we say every year, man. All you can do is hope. Hope that at this point you're hoping that Tom Brady knows what he's doing. Like last year, the hope was that Antonio Pierce and the whole Raider mystique thing and their violence, physicality stuff was going to carry over, and it didn't. So now the new hope is that Tom Brady knows what he's doing.
Yeah, and also one thing I did think of was Tom Brady might value quarterbacks that don't have a strong physical skill set and more quote unquote football IQ a little bit more, just because he was that guy. He was the guy that was drafted in the 7th round and became one of the best players of all time. And but that's very rare. That rarely happens. Like people will say, "Oh, you could do this. Look at Tom Brady," but like you're pointing to outliers that hardly ever happen. So that's one thing I do wonder, is how much value he does place in those type of quarterbacks, and is that view a little bit more antiquated now? All right, we do have another question. Do we have a roster to compete in division? If not, how many seasons will it take to get there? Yeah, the divide is pretty big right now. Obviously, the Raiders were 0-6 in a division. They had a good draft, but the rest of the division also had really good drafts too. So it's going to take more good drafts in a row, and a hope that they don't continue drafting well for the Raiders to catch up in this aspect.
Yeah, I mean, like we don't know the salary cap figure for 2025 yet, but the Raiders are projected to have over $100 million in space. They have a pretty deep cachet of draft picks. They have an extra 3rd round pick because of the Devontae Adams trade. And they're also projected to get 2 6th round compensatory picks because of free agency last year. So, and they have a pretty high 1st round pick. And so the opportunity is there to improve the roster pretty quickly. And I mean, the Broncos and Chargers, like they went from being pretty bad teams last year to being good teams this year. So it shows that if you make some savvy free agent signings, draft well, and hire the right head coach, like you can compete pretty quickly. So, it could be as soon as next year, but that kind of assumes a lot of things go right. But that's the NFL. That's how it goes.
Yeah, it's hard to really say because we've talked about the defense. There's so many guys, so many free agents, and you envisioned, Pierce and Graham being back. They want these guys back, and you have a nucleus, and you kind of go back to what your vision was in training camp. Maybe that could actually be a good defense. But now you have no idea if the new staff's going to like Robert Spillane or Merrick or Jack Jones. I mean, you have no idea what their thoughts are going to be on these kind of guys. So Malcolm Kuntz, I mean, is he a guy you want back now with the new staff? So it's kind of hard to say. how good the roster is, because a lot of it could be gone. It could be a whole brand new roster next year. So I think that's one of the things we have to put a pin in that one and come back to it.
Yeah. All right.
So
Last question.
one.
Have we put any interview requests in yet?
As of, I mean, they just fired AP, so they haven't done that yet. Just to kind of, so people know like the rules. So like, because of the running rule, they do have to interview at least 2 diverse candidates before they make a hire. And also the NFL changed the interview process last year to where if you want to interview somebody that's coaching for a playoff team, you have to wait. You can do virtual interviews, but you can't do in-person interviews until the end of the divisional round games. And so they can request interviews and do those virtually, but chances are they probably aren't going to hire somebody until after the divisional round, unless they hire a coach who currently isn't employed. Like if they want to go talk to Mike Vrabel or John Gruden or a college coach, they could do that tomorrow if they wanted to. But if they want to hire somebody that's currently employed by a playoff team, like a Brian Flores, for example, then they won't be able to do that in person for a while. And so the earliest we would see a hire is probably toward the end of this month or maybe even early February, depending on how long they're coaching. Because if a coach does keep advancing, that means you have to wait longer to do that in-person interview. So it could be a lengthy process depending on which candidate the Raiders are targeting. Like, again, if they want to hire somebody that is currently unemployed, then this could be resolved as soon as next week or later this week. But if they want to hire an assistant on a current playoff team, then it's going to be a little bit.
Yeah, so root against the Buccaneers and the Vikings. If you're a Raider fan, is root they get knocked out of the playoffs quickly. I mean, that is the thing. Like, there are teams that have been interested in coaches, but they just had to wait too long, and they end up pulling the trigger because they just don't want to wait any longer.
Yep, can happen.
Yeah.
All
All
right.
right.
To the question. Okay, I just one more. Back to the question about the roster. I think, and the big thing will be Max Crosby. I mean, do you trade Max Crosby now? I mean, it's a guy who wants a new contract. Does that make sense at this point where you're at as a franchise? I think he wouldn't mind probably a move at this point. So that's probably one of the bigger things on this offseason on the menu is, I mean, is it time to move on from Max?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure he'll. I don't think we talked about it, but he had some interesting comments today on the podcast, Sirius XM podcast he has before the AP news came out. He basically said, worrying about the coaching staff isn't my job, which is a pretty strong 180 from his stance a year ago, where he basically was going to request a trade if AP didn't get the job. So it's clear his stance, has changed, and he had a thing a couple weeks ago where he said he wanted a new deal. So I think it's hard to say without knowing who the next head coach is going to be. Like, maybe it's somebody that Max Crosby loves and wants to play for. Maybe it's not. I think it'll also depend on what they do at quarterback. And so there's really no pressure for him to jump out right now, tomorrow, and be like, all right, I want out of here since you guys fired AP. Like, I would imagine he's going to sit back, watch how the offseason plays out, and then see what he wants to do from there. But from a team perspective, I think, Tom Telesco and whoever the next head coach is going to be, they're going to want to keep Max Crosby on their team. So I'm sure, if it's restructuring his deal to give him a raise or whatever it might be, I would imagine that they would want to explore that pathway before they just ship him out of here for draft picks or whatever they get.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I think Crosby is going to be a player that's going to play at a high level for a long time. So I think he would be able to withstand a rebuild and still be good. And just as far as his the culture and the leadership, I think he's a guy that you would want to keep in the building unless you get some monstrous offer. But I mean, we saw what the Raiders did with the capital they got for Khalil Mack. Not much.
It's a new regime, man.
Still playing at a high level. It's true. But to me, I think Crosby's a guy you just want to keep in the building.
Yeah, I wouldn't be trading him unless we talked about this. I literally at least one first, maybe two, but I wouldn't be in a rush to trade Max Crosby.
Yeah. All right. That's all we have for you guys today. It's about an hour. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Appreciate the tips. We will probably talk to you guys pretty soon if something else happens, if the Raiders hire a new head coach. But we'll get into some draft content soon, and we'll announce that on Twitter. Make sure you guys subscribe on YouTube, and leave a comment and subscribe wherever you guys get your podcasts. We'll talk to you guys soon.
All right, y'all. Peace.
Hasta la vista.